partnerships with nonprofits, central banks, universities, and even the Vatican.
Today, we will talk about XRP and an update in the SEC case, because it kind of appears as if we are almost at the end of this. And of course, it all happened on 5/8, which is a part of the whole 589 quote unquote conspiracy. And if you add up 2025 in 2025, that is equal to 9. And it's really interesting because it happened on the same day that we got a new pope, which has some really interesting connections into XRP as well. So it's not just about XRP. The interesting thing is that there are some ties back into Saturn as well. And I don't get huge into the gematria stuff, so I just kind of take others at their word on this. And I have commented on this a few times in the past, where in 2019, Stellar changed their logo, and they explained it as it's got just a hint of Saturn in there. I just don't see there actually being a cause to explain it in that way, so it just kind of sticks out. On the larger implications piece, I'll be talking about the more institutional implications that this development has as well. And there are some pretty interesting price predictions tossed out there, especially on this more conspiratorial end of thing. I think if we get regulations, if we get utility adoption pretty much immediately after that, which I think wouldn't happen overnight, then I don't know. Here is the update itself, and this is from the New York SEC, and it essentially says that the case is closed, and it calls out the exact amount to be paid here, which is a cool $50 million. So in short, they don't have to pay the amount that they were arguing against, and that part of the case is actually done. However, it's not completely done, which I feel as if I have had to explain and make a real point of that each time that I have actually talked about this, where yes, it is a really big case itself. It does have a lot of implications for the entire crypto industry, but it's a very long process, which is the case with pretty much anything in this kind of a category. So we're not completely out of the woods. We are pretty close. And it really has to come down to Judge Torres coming back to provide kind of like a final statement. And then it sounds, from everything I have seen in the last 24 hours or so, that would be the final step, which is also explained in a little bit more detail here. And it's not 100% done. We are still not 100% done. I am not a law guy, so I am not an expert on any of those topics, and I am not an expert in crypto itself. I just talk about things that I find interesting. The more interesting point for me is the implications of what a closed case could actually mean on the institutional adoption side. I am even of the opinion that there's not a lot of proof that institutions are actually actively engaged with the XRPL and with Ripple themselves as a company, which would also include things like Ripple Pay or Ripple Net or ODL or whatever it's actually called now. On the contrary, if you look at something like Stellar, they have a lot of tangible evidence of real world institutional adoption happening right now. So I'm not trying to say it's not being used or it's not being designed upon or it's not being looked at. There are, I think it's been said, about 1,700 NDAs. So who knows what is actually in there and how much is actually tied up. With all that said, I think that they are concentrating more on the custody and the private settlement end of things And the clip right here is a perfect example of how they are potentially lined up with providing institutional custody.
With Ripple Custody, formerly known as Medico, it's working with large institutions and making sure that they can scale. We have tremendous coverage of some of the largest financial institutions in Europe, be it DBS, HSBC, BBVA, Switzerland, and they're trusting us to come in, not only provide custody, but allow them to tokenize and pull it together in one package. So scale is going to happen when some of this fragmentation that we talk about it kind of is removed. We almost want this to be kind of boring. It should be really clear. It's not like taking a front seat and you spend half the time you meet with a customer just explaining the technology and why they shouldn't be worried about it, but you're really focusing on the benefits, the real world utility that the solution brings. And without that, it's going to be, it's a slog. And I do feel it's getting better. Again, the amount of inbound requests we're getting to meet with large institutions around tokenization products is just astounding vis-a-vis a year ago.
And on to the next interesting tie in here. A few months ago, the White House had that crypto roundtable thing, and you had people from Ripple, Cardano. There was, what's his name, Michael Taylor there, who was acting like a complete child. And I didn't really pay a lot of attention to that because not much of substance was actually talked about. It was essentially just some kind of a weird presentation and a show. I am pretty confident that there were some important conversations had that were not in the public. However, the event itself didn't really mean anything to me. So there is now some talk about a Truth Social post that Trump actually posted, which specifically called out Cardano, Solana, and XRP was actually not a result of Trump himself, which shouldn't really surprise anyone. I would hope that he's not the only one who's in charge of crafting what he actually posts. At that time, I did find it really interesting, and I was a little skeptical and even suspicious that he would go as far as calling out specific cryptos and projects and companies at that time. Now it sounds as if there have been some developments and some consequences around that. And Dark explains it a little bit more here. It happened in March, which was a couple of months ago now. And it appears as if Trump somehow found out and that individual is not welcome in anything anymore. So I don't really trust what these kinds of people actually say. I think Trump is a very intelligent person, especially when it comes to these kinds of political maneuvers, and he does put on a show extremely well. But I don't really trust anything that he or anyone else have to actually say. So I think it's either something that's part of a larger happening or it's not really important at all. And of course, there was the case of Chris Larson. He 10 million in XRP to support the Future Forward USA PAC in the November 2024 timeframe in order to support the Democratic presidential candidate at that time. So on the other end of this, there is the opposing view where price and liquidity really control everything. And that includes what the media actually chooses to talk about in order to retroactively explain why the price is what it is. I don't think macro things affect stocks and charts as much as a lot of others do. However, I don't think that they are two completely independent things and they don't have any correlations at all. I don't think people like Pharaoh are trying to say that there's no involvement, but there are things like this that happen at specific times that have an obvious impact. And even though the price of a lot of different cryptos, not just XRP, went up on the same day. I'm not at that point to say that it is not involved at all. And there's the tie in to the Pope and Vatican as well, which has a really interesting tie into Ripple itself.
And about 5 years ago, very early for a company of Ripple's size and stage, we decided to formalize Ripple's focus on impact and to create a team internally that worked on these 3 or 4 areas of focus.
And today we're going to focus on one of those pillars that you mentioned. Obviously, that's financial inclusion. So how does financial inclusion fit into what the company is doing?
So it's very central to what we do. Part of Ripple's founding idea was actually to democratize financial services. Our founder, Chris Larson, sometimes talks about making globalization work for everyone, completing globalization. So what we're doing from a business standpoint is improving both individual and household economics through things like faster, cheaper, more reliable remittances. But we're also doing what we can through philanthropic funding and partnerships with nonprofits, central banks, universities, and even the Vatican. Generally, partners who are interested in finally moving the needle on financial inclusion with big, bold applications of fintech.
Yeah, so that is a pretty interesting point that not a lot of other people and companies in the space are able to say. I don't really know what the involvement is. It's some humanitarian thing, who knows? And I don't honestly care. It is an interesting point. So now I will talk a little bit on the 589 stuff. There's a lot of interesting ties here, and I won't explain it a whole lot. I'll just kind of present it on the screen and comment on it a little bit. So we've got 985 and 589 here on 2 of the largest Ripple accounts on X. And of course, we've got 589, 5/8 of 2025. The 267th Pope was chosen. 589 minus 267 is 322. And that is one of the pieces of symbolism that is associated with the Skull and Bones Club stuff. And if you're interested in that, there are a lot of very important people who have ties in that. You've got some more things on the Pope. Has to do with, 69 and 589. I don't know. It's interesting. Then you've got more 589 stuff, and 589 is 133. I still really don't understand what 133's significance is, other than the 33 aspect, which has to do with Masonic stuff, and I don't really know anything on that. And again, I'm not all that interested. Then you have a lot of 334s and 444s with the Pope, and 133s and all that stuff, so I don't know. I don't really check into it, but there are people who I actually follow who make some interesting points, and it's probably connected to some things that I talk about. I just don't know. And it is the first time that we have had a pope from the United States. His name is Peter something, and he changed it to Pietro Parolin. So that is interesting. And then, the whole 589 was the date. 58 is a gematria interpretation of his name. And it happened at 5:08 London time. So I don't know. It's a lot of coincidences. And to top it all off, 589 was the day that I chose to actually come back. So if that is not the ultimate sign, I don't know what is.